I hear the rain coming down on the roof yet again. Must be time for more cozy horror. With me, Dr. Plague. Thanks so much for joining me again today, and I hope the weather didn't hold you up too long. Let's start things off with a story by SaltedSunflower, talking about a lesser used area for horror, but still horrific in its own way. Let's hear about something dark in the gym steam room.
Listen, I'm not really sure if anyone's going to actually read this, and whether they're going to believe me or not. I have to tell someone, anyone. I feel like I'm going crazy, but I know I'm not, and since I just recently moved, I have no one close by that I can trust to talk to about this without them thinking I'm totally insane. I'd call my mom, but she has enough on her plate right now. I don't need her to get worried. I don't even know if she would believe me, to be honest. And the last thing I need is her to think I've lost it in the new city I'm calling home all alone. So, I guess I'll just start at the beginning. I left my hometown for the big city. No shiny special reason for why, really. I finished school. I've been applying to jobs left and right. Managed to get an interview via video call for an above entry-level position in my field. I guess I nailed it, 'cause within a week I'd gotten the offer. I was packing up what little I had in my parents' old dingy minivan and hopping onto the interstate. I moved into a new apartment in an older but more affordable area of the city. Got settled in for the first month with establishing a new routine and learning my way around my new job. By the second month, I was at ease enough to start branching out and exploring more. Found a nice bar by my work that I began to frequent once a week with a quick drink. Found a local market by my apartment that I started to go to on the weekends for fresh produce. And I joined a nearby gym that boasted quality equipment and being open extra late at night for the busy 9-to-5ers like myself. It's a pretty nice gym, don't get me wrong. The equipment's well maintained and fairly new, and they recently remodeled the locker room. I had absolutely no issue, really, until 4 nights ago, when I decided to go relax in the whirlpool after a particularly grueling session. I soaked for a while, enjoying the jets and the hot water, thinking about nothing in particular, and then hopped out and headed for the locker room, passing by a set of doors I hadn't paid any attention to when I'd entered. I'm still learning the place, so I was unsurprisingly curious, and took a quick peek. One door led to the gym sauna. The other led to a steam room. I've sat in a sauna before. My old gym had one that I tried a few times. It was nice enough, I suppose. This gym sauna was packed to the max capacity when I looked in, and I made a mental note to check in another time for it. I redirected my gaze to the steam room door and tried to peer inside with no luck. Steam billowed all around inside, and I could barely make out the shape of another gym member sitting on the bench in the room. The steam seemed to distort the figure at times, though I couldn't really focus well on it. I thought about having a quick rinse and going inside to check it out. I'd never sat in a steam room before, and it wasn't nearly as packed as the sauna was. But I was kind of tired already, and still had to shower and eat dinner, so I decided I'd come back the next evening and try it out. I really wish I'd just done the damn sauna instead. Next night, I came back and decided I'd do my workout first before trying out the steam room. I told myself it'd be a nice way to unwind after some good exercise and something to look forward to while I sweat my butt off. Work had run a little late, so I arrived a little later than usual at the gym and found it much emptier than it usually was, which I honestly appreciated. I did my usual routine, made my way to the locker room for a quick rinse, and then threw on a swimsuit and headed out towards the set of doors I'd passed the night prior. I took another peek into the sauna, and there were a few people in there. Not as many as there had been the other night, but still enough that I felt more solidified in my choice of trying out the steam room, which, from what I could see, looked empty. I remember feeling relieved almost, seeing that no one was inside. I could have this first-time experience all to myself, and enjoy a quiet moment of steamy solitude. I opened the door and stepped in, and immediately was greeted by a swath of moisture and heat. The room smelled like old pool water, and as I breathed in, the air felt thick in my throat. There were stone benches up another 2 of the 4 walls of the room, and the floor and the walls were an earthy-colored tile. Steam swirled all around me as I made my way over to one of the benches and sat down, my whole body already slick with sweat and water. I felt my thighs slide against the moist stone beneath me. I jumped as a loud crashing sound suddenly echoed in the room. I looked up at the source of the noise to see steam pouring out of a vent up high close to the ceiling. I realized it was just whatever kind of machinery they had next to the room that must generate the steam, and settled back against the wall. I closed my eyes for a little while, letting myself relax and thinking about how nice, albeit slightly gross, it all felt. Every inch of my body was very much drenched, and it had only been maybe a minute or 2. While the thickness of the air had been off-putting at first, I was quickly growing to like how it felt as I breathed. More, even, if that makes sense. I really was rather enjoying myself until I felt something glide along my thigh, ever so slightly, and my eyes shot open. I couldn't see anything. I immediately looked to my left and right. I hadn't heard anyone enter or leave the room, but maybe somebody had? Yet, as I looked around, I saw no one. The steam was pretty much a swirling white haze at that point, and it was nearly impossible to see a foot in front of me. I couldn't make out any figures within the room at all, and when I called out a quick greeting, there was no reply, just my voice and the steam that still billowed out of the vents above me. Was it supposed to stay on that long? As soon as I had the thought, there was another loud clang, and the steam stopped. I let out a deep sigh, trying to ease myself back against the wall. I was imagining things. I had to be. It must have just been a set of moisture droplets running down my thigh is all. That must have been what I felt. Except something felt wrong. I couldn't quite place it, but I honestly had the deepest sensation that I wasn't alone in that room. I had half a mind to just leave at that point. It had felt nice at first, but I was beginning to feel weird. When I tried, though, it almost was like my brain and body were disconnected, and I was rooted to the bench. I just couldn't move. And then I felt it again, only this time it was ever so slight on the back of my neck. And then it started on my right arm, much less subtle this time, and I knew it wasn't moisture droplets dropping onto my skin, primarily because droplets trickle down, and this, whatever it was going up my arm. I wanted to let out a scream, wanted to jump up and run out of there as fast as I could, slippery floor be damned, but I still couldn't move. I couldn't even turn my neck to get a look at what exactly I was feeling. I could only make out what little I could see through the steam from my peripheral vision, which I'm honestly kind of glad now that I couldn't get a better look at whatever it was. I could make out some kind of darkness, some kind of vague mound of shadows, and when I directed my gaze down at my arm, I felt my stomach do a flip. Slimy, black tendrils slithered up my arm. They were thin and stringy looking as they glided even further up my shoulder with ease. They felt moist and radiated heat. It wasn't until I felt them slowly wrapping and tightening around my neck that I started to truly process what was happening. My heart was pounding. I was frozen, my body entirely unresponsive to the commands my mind was screaming at it. And in that moment, I thought I was going to die as my vision began to darken. And then it all went away in an instant as the door swung open and the loud voices cut into the silence of the steam. My arm jerked, and just like that, my limbs were back in action, and I could move. I looked over to see a couple had walked in, chatting about something cheerful and barely noticing me sitting there. The steam was no longer so thick, and as my mind caught up with everything happening, I quickly snapped my head to my right and saw nothing. My heart was still pounding, my throat felt tight, and my legs were feeling like jelly. I got up as quickly as they'd allow me to, without slipping and falling, and made my way unsteadily to the door, the couple still absent-mindedly chattering with one another and not even looking my way. The rest of my time at the gym that night was a blur. I didn't shower there like usual, electing to throw my clothes on quick and shower at home instead. I'd gotten some weird looks from the staff members at the front desk as I made my way out, but I honestly didn't care how I looked in that moment. I just wanted to get away. I made it back to my apartment safely, thankfully, and I remember sitting down in my shower and letting the cold water cascade down me. I absolutely did not want anything warm or hot or steamy. I've taken a lot of cold showers since then. Call me crazy, but I actually plan on going back to the gym once I start feeling a little better. Well, a little more sane, I guess. If I even can, which writing this all out for others to read kinda helps. The membership wasn't exactly cheap or refundable, and I do need some sort of physical work, since my job is just hours on hours of sitting and staring at screens. I don't plan on going anywhere near the steam room again, though. In fact, I think I'm going to avoid the entire spa and pool area altogether from now on. If I ever stupidly get the desire to go back in there, all I have to do to remind myself is to look in the mirror and follow the pale red marks that slither their way up my arm and around my neck.
Wasn't exactly the kind of thing I usually find lurking in the steam rooms, but horrific nonetheless. Let's swap it up from gyms to the forest again, with a story from MidwesternGothica about a strange clan of wildmen in the forest of Ohio.
Throughout my childhood and young adulthood, I would often travel with my parents and become immersed in the remaining pristine lands of this country. These adventures ranged from alpine hiking in the Rockies to treks through the maroon badlands of the Southwest, and even the dense, verdant hills of Appalachia. Of course, life and lousy people are the bane of any person's simple existence. When my now former boss decided to cover her ass by picking me as the unwilling sacrifice, thus unraveling yet another chapter in my chaotic book of life, I packed it in and found a spot to start over. With a little help from my savings and mostly supportive family, I figured that I may as well live in as heavenly a place as possible while going through hell. So I settled on Ohio's forested hill country. Nestled within some of the most pastoral farmland still left in the country, I found myself a quaint rental in a two-street town that itself sat outside of a proud national forest preserve. That great land of woods, rivers, and hills could even rival its most well-known and deeper Appalachian cousins to the south and east. Better still, it was comparatively less visited, making it a prime spot for me to trek through on my off days. I was more than a bit out of practice and out of shape, but I picked back up on the lessons I'd learned in my younger years in the wilderness quick enough. Those first few hikes were tough, but I talked to a few park employees and rangers before my initial venture to ensure that I wasn't going to get myself on a 411 podcast the hard way. In fact, there was one especially cute ranger who wore her hat just crooked enough for it to be intentional. One I was working up the nerve to ask out for a coffee date when my newfound paradise turned into a nightmare. I figure at a certain point that a solo weekender in the more dense region of the wilderness would be the ultimate remedy to my mental ailment. A nagging voice in the back of my head began whispering otherwise, but I figured that was my anxiety rather than instinct. Hell, it started out fine. I had more than the necessary supplies, a clear route planned, and two people, including said ranger, who knew my plans and my desired endpoint. While I wasn't such a fool to figure that nothing could go wrong, I figured if I was careful and patient on the trail, at least nothing catastrophic would happen. Then, I got myself lost. I don't know quite when it happened, but I know how it happened. Some goofed up combination of my GPS battery system failing me, and not checking the trail map enough, going off trails to make camp in the dark, and my own jacked up headspace that I'd been ignoring for months now. After the initial panic hit, I did my best to calm the what-ifs and remember my training. Get to the nearest elevated point, get my position, and get on a marked trail. I did just that, and saw that I wasn't as far off as I'd feared. In fact, I came across what looked almost like a game trail, if not for the slight indents of human-like prints smattered the damp earthen floor. Not stopping to wonder why those footprints were barefoot, my only concern was connecting with a main trail and hopefully finding other people. With a renewed sense of confidence, I proceeded on down the game trail. I still had that positive outlook in mind when I heard the first howls. Well, howls are putting it mildly. They were more like some wicked amalgamation of roars of bears and the yowls of big cats. The thing that wigged me out a bit at first was that black bears typically strove to avoid human contact, and the Appalachian cougar was either extinct or at best barely existent. Plus, I had a few defenses up my sleeve in the form of bear spray and my prized Glock 20 that my old man had gifted me the day I'd taken my first solo trip, years ago now. If the concentrated capsaicin spray didn't deter some forest beast, 10 millimeters of jacketed hollow point surely would, though every part of me hoped it wouldn't come to that point. I'd almost take a mauling over having to kill one of those wonderful endangered creatures. The fact that the howling sounded like multiple creatures at once, yet none that were distinctly identifiable, led me to make camp earlier than normal that afternoon. If there was a bear or a rogue lion nearby, the best action I could take at that point would be to do my due diligence in finding a proper site for the night, and head out bright and early. After finding a decently open spot away from the dense vegetation or food sources, I set up camp and separated a cooking site. All the while, I let a few hays and hoes of my own to alert whatever animal might be near to mind each other's spaces. The part of the strange cries that made me freeze in the middle of my dinner of rehydrated beefy mac was, aside from how they seemed to be creeping ever closer, that the harder I listened, the more the guttural howls, grunts, and yelps seemed to sound like words. Human words. Nigh unintelligible words, albeit clear intonations and constants that few animals can make or mimic. Even cougars, which could sound like a female or a baby crying out in distress, don't actually form words. Could be crows, I briefly thought, as I packed away my smellies in a bear canister. The thought calmed me for a few moments till I shook my head, remembering that even crows could hardly make such deep, nasty tones. Now, at a total loss as to what was in the woods with me, I figured that I wasn't going to get much sleep that night. I didn't even dare build a fire for fear of attracting rather than dissuading whatever might be out there amongst the vast expanse of trees. As the darkest hours of the night began to weave their web of paranoia, I took refuge in my tent, and some solace in my none too measly defenses. It was not so much if something was out there watching me, but rather the unknown of what it could be, if not a typical member of the local fauna. Having resolved to wait the night out and hike out in the morning, I was thankful at least that the skies were clear as forecasted. The eternal swath of celestial bodies made for a much more pleasant canopy than my rainfly. As I lay on the sleeping pad trying to recall what my father had taught me about identifying the constellations, my eyes grew heavy as they did when the serotonin of peace finally replaces many minutes of panic. That, coupled with the nearly 3 days of continuous trekking, was now threatening to overtake my fear for control over my body's natural inclinations. The gentle stillness of the forest, only exacerbated that feeling. Wait a minute. Stillness? In these woods? Even in those deepest hours, it was hardly ever silent. The lack of chittering or the occasional flying squirrel, the huffing of skunks, and the hooting of the barred owl were noticeable. That realization hit me just as the first spear tore through my tent. For a few minutes I sat there stupefied, not even registering what the hell was happening, until two more crude weapons sliced through the canvas. One of them narrowly avoided burying itself in my skull. I wasn't 3 times lucky, however, and the last thrown spear bit deeply into my left bicep. Even as I was thrown on my back from the impact and shocked from the bolt of white-hot pain, my brain didn't register that I was under attack till the same bastardized caterwauling from earlier returned, although now it was less of a call and response and more like the war cry of the Devil's Own Legion. I grabbed my backpack from my prone position in the tent, throwing it over me in a desperate attempt for cover as a final pair of spears tried to find their mark. I was just quick enough to get the pack up on my chest as one of those fierce weapons ripped into the nylon instead of my flesh. The war whoops and animalistic roars were nearly on top of me now. I figured that staying in my tent surely meant death, so still holding my speared backpack, I burst through the shredded side. Right as I freed myself, I fell sideways and down into the forest floor with a rough jerk. Christ alive, what now? The damn spear had caught on a torn flap and tripped me up. Oh God, I'm a dead man. I'm a dead man, I thought, now seeing a pair of wild-looking humanoids approaching out of the brush with wicked gleams in their fierce orange-yellow eyes. As the large figure approached, I began to be able to make out some of their features in bright gleams of the moonlight. They were indeed huge, relative to even my 6-foot linebacker frame. Even in that pale, dim light, I could tell their great size. The bastards seemed thick with hair, too, far from what anyone could be. But it was those terrible yellow eyes and snarling visages that made me realize I was most assuredly not dealing with any ordinary humans. I heard soft pattering to my left and another on my right. More of these things were flanking me, toying with me, like they'd done this before. Not knowing whether they wanted to kill me or eat me or do something even more gruesome than my own mind could conjure in that moment, I resolved to at least die with my boots on. When I had fallen, by yet another miracle, my pack had spilled a few of its contents that had been stopped in place by my body. Chief among them was my father's 10mm and my own maglite. With a maniacal grin, I exploded into movement in a way that one can only when they're dealing with their own grim demise. My slashed arm arced with the swing and sent streaks of pain up through my body as the maglite connected brutally with the strange humanoid's arm. Howls of pain erupted as that and at least one of my bullets found its mark. Having bought myself a few minutes, I pushed upright and back a few yards against a massive tree fall, smacking the maglite button on. Part of me even now wishes that I hadn't witnessed the true forms of what hunted me that night. The maglite's powerful beam, revealed what the full moon could not. These things, they were human, sort of, but also something else entirely, something more. They stood bipedal and tall, as I already discerned, but what I had first thought to be bunches of excess hair was actually thick but surprisingly well-kept fur of various brunette shades covering almost every square inch of their otherwise naked forms. Their limbs were as elongated as their torsos, topped off by fearsome knife-like claws. Indeed, it was the man-beast's face that shook me, and have thus adhered most to my poor mind. Each of them was different, yet equally as horrible. One of them, presumably the leader by its frame and command over the others, was snout-like, though more ursine in nature than its companions. It was not as natural as a bear, however, the tip of its snout curling inward in a grotesque manner, and I realized it was smiling at me. Unlike the others, its eyes were fiery, amber blazes that seemed to carry within them a tragic brew of pain and fury. It carried in its furry hand a gnarled stave that stood nearly as high as its bushy head and as solid around its forearms. Carved with the strange sigils and symbols, I made my fading mind spin deeper into madness with every passing second. Of course, the blood loss from the gash of my own arm wasn't helping. All the while those eyes stared fixedly at my own, very mortal ones. The faces of the others were far more canine or cat-like, yet all held the same malformed grins as they calmly approached their prey. I noticed to my further dismay that, though I'd successfully blown multiple gaping holes in both their chieftain and their female cat beast on the right, those wounds were fast healing. Lord knows if the shots had even slowed them down. When they were within a few feet of me, and I was prepared to make my final futile stand, after pissing myself in terror and making whatever peace with God I could muster, the chieftain held out its arm, grasping the eldritch staff. Obeying their leader, its charges promptly stopped mid-stride and dropped to all fours, crouching as their respective natural animals would have. As he crossed those final steps between us, the truth, at least some of it, of what these things were, came to light under the rays of the moon. Still wearing that abhorrent smile, with each step, the creature morphed before my gaze. The dark brown fur covering it from snoot to foot shed, its snarling animalistic visage changing back into that of a racially undefined but hateful-eyed man. His tapered claws shifted back into thick human nails, muscles twisted, bones cracked, and limbs retracted, until the beast had become a man once more. He wore a leather loincloth, and still held that terrible stave, whose sigils I now saw matched those of the deep emerald and wood blue painted on its face and legs and chest. The beast-turned-man was now so close that I could almost taste his coppery breath as he lowered his head to meet my own, those amber blazes of eyes boring into my soul. Trembling, I couldn't even scream or beg for mercy, as the fear gripped me so tight. With a movement that surpassed the quickness of any athlete, he grasped the side of my skull with his rough, meaty hand. Visions assaulted me of explorers and campers, both present and far past, being stalked and toyed with before being ritualistically butchered and consumed in the name of a long-forgotten deity. Visions of treaties made then broken, warnings unheeded, and finally of the brutal consequences that followed, all of which strove to shatter my already fragile psyche. Believing then that I was doomed, I shut my eyes in desperation, hoping that I could conjure up any other image in my mind's eye before meeting my Creator that wasn't these abominations. The last thing I remember before waking with a start in the local hospital, a brunette-haired and crooked-hatted ranger sitting at my bedside, was the chieftain whispering something. "What?" I croaked, my throat as raspy as a lifelong smoker's. The ranger, Mia, twitched into consciousness, her half-asleep state broken. Here, just sip this, slowly now," she said, softly guiding a straw to my lips. As the cool water trickled down my throat and gave me new life, I smiled up at her. "Guess I should have stayed on the trail, huh?" I joked, with a painful grin. Mia shook her head, matching my sardonic expression, her great raven mane rippling like inky waves. "I won't bother saying I told you so now. I'll save that for our coffee date." Even feeling like I had crawled out of perdition itself, my eyes lit up at the words. "I'll pick you up at 8. Just got a couple of things I gotta take care of first, huh?" She let out a giggle that had some of the nurses rolling their eyes. "I'll say. But weird thing is, even though we found your mangled campsite, The hiker that radioed us yesterday morning found you on the main trail a mile east, like you just laid down and slept there," she said, turning her back to refill the cup. "You wouldn't happen to, recall how you got there, or what happened before, would you?" "Very weird. Yeah, I don't really remember what," I started to reply before I looked up at her. Mia suddenly had an intense expression on her olive-hued face that had not been there a second ago. "Nothing? Nothing about the animal attack?" she said pointedly. Something about her abrupt change told me that I shouldn't answer. The whole ordeal was more akin to a nightmare than reality in any case, and part of me just wanted to compartmentalize the whole shit show up to some kind of natural explanation. Maybe I'd just foraged the wrong mushrooms or went into an acute psychiatric episode out there. Really, I just wanted to move on, as I'd already done with so much in my life, that I gave Mia the answer she and I both needed. "Nah, not really," I said, shaking my numb head. "Only that someone out there sure as hell is looking out for my stupid self." Mia dropped that fervent look as swiftly as it had risen, giving me another of her warm smiles that validated the voice telling me to sequester what another voice was screaming was the truth. She gave my hand a squeeze and moved again to get the cup. "You know, Carl, I like you because you have a genuine love and, more importantly, respect for this land. There are so many people, past and present, who think they do, but they have no idea whatsoever. You know, some jackasses are even doing those stupid heart carvings over ancient cave drawings." She turned back and placed the cup in my hands before sliding me a piece of paper with a phone number. I took both and with a shrug said, "Guess it's just how I was raised, and see you soon?" "I hope so," she said, with her usual pepperiness, before turning to head out. Still, if more people had a little bit of respect, maybe fewer fools would go missing, and less pristine land would disappear with each passing year. Hell if I could argue with that, and said as much before waving her goodbye. She turned around once more before pushing through the exit. "Just remember, Carl, next time stay on the damn trail. Your guardian angel might not have as much pull as you think she does." As she left, I lay my head back down on the hospital bed. I could have sworn on anything that I saw a faint but fiery glint of amber when she winked at me. Did I see that? Or was it just simply the glow of the sunset mixing with the discolored hospital lights? I shoved that thought also into the recesses of my mind, resolving to stay as balanced as my will would allow. I was safe now, healing up, and even had my first real date in a while to look forward to. Mia had also taken the liberty of getting me a few personal items, my laptop included. Plus, I had pretty damn near majestic view of the hills from my window. Life could be worse. Still, a voice that wasn't quite mine kept whispering a singular, repeated promise, threatening to undo that threadbare sanity. When the earth is sick, its guardians will emerge to heal it.
Seems like all the weird things are coming out of Ohio these days. I'll have to warn my kid brother. That's his stomping grounds for the moment. I don't know, maybe he's got some weird stories we can use too. Moving from steam rooms to forests to, of course, the basement. Let's hear a story by Mr. Outlaw _ about the people in the basement.
Hey man, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's people in the basement. Chris's words were somewhere between silence and a whisper. I sat in the bed, my eyes adjusting to the frantic figure in front of me. What? What are you talking about? Shh, quiet, dude. There's people in the basement. Like 6 of them. Swear to God. He paused, taking a few deep breaths. We should get out of here, like right now. I rubbed my eyes, trying to get the fatigue to settle so I could comprehend the magnitude of what he was saying. For context, my friends and I booked an Airbnb near the mountains for the weekend. We were here to hike and drink, get our minds off work and school. I had been super tired after hiking, so I had taken a little nap. I shook my head. You went down to the basement? We weren't supposed to. They told us not to. Yeah, dude, I know, but I did it anyway, and I saw people down there, and we need to leave now. What kind of people? I asked, pretty much fully awake now. You mean the owners of the place? They came back? Chris shook his head. Nah, not them. Weird-looking people. Creepy-looking people. I sat up, thinking that maybe Chris had taken some of the LSD we'd been saving for the next day. Dude, relax. Explain to me what you saw. He laid it out pretty concisely, despite the fact that the people who had posted the listing had explicitly told us not to go down there. Chris had gotten drunk, gotten curious, and went down to have a look. To his surprise, the door had been unlocked. He couldn't find the light switch, but there was just enough of it coming through the windows for him to be able to make his way downstairs. Arriving at the bottom, he allowed his eyes a few seconds to adjust, and right in front of him, he could see a small table with about 6 people sitting around it, their outlines illustrated by the afternoon light. At first, his brain rationalized it as a large bunch of dolls or puppets that had been placed down there, but he continued looking at them, and eventually, one of them turned their head to face him. He didn't stick around after that and shot up the stairs, shutting the door behind him. As he told me this, I kind of didn't want to believe him, but there was also absolutely no reason for him to be lying about it. He just wasn't that kind of guy. Coupled with the genuine terror on his face, I began leaning towards the idea that he was telling the truth, and that there was actually a bunch of people sitting silently at a table in the darkness of the basement. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, seeing Jay and Paul standing on the front porch grilling burgers. Then I looked back at Chris. If you're telling me the truth, then we need to call the people who own the place. I tried. They don't pick up. I've sent them texts, too. I shook my head. So what? You think they're dangerous? Should we call the cops? Chris shrugged. I don't know. I don't know if they're dangerous, but they sure as hell didn't look right, and I want to get out of here. For a while, we stared at each other, the general silence of the house becoming progressively more ominous. After a while, I sighed. Yeah, I guess. Let's get out of here. We grabbed our phones, wallets, and car keys and moved downstairs, out of the house as fast as we could. Jay and Paul were laughing, holding beers as we approached them. Paul turned around, pointing a greasy spatula at us. You guys hungry or what? Chris began telling them what he'd seen, but it was obvious that they were more than a few drinks deep and weren't taking anything he was saying seriously. Dude, sounds like you're tripping, Jay said. You sure you're not tripping? I'm being serious. I swear to God I'm serious. We need to get out of here, like right now. Well, I'm about 5 beers in, so I ain't driving, Jay said. And I sure as hell ain't letting any of you guys drive my truck. You sure you weren't just seeing stuff? Fine, I'm walking then, Chris said. I'm not staying here. Look, I'll go down there and talk to them, Paul said, half joking. See what the hell they want. Jay laughed as sheer disbelief washed over Chris's face. I'm not bullshitting, man. I'm not, he said. Yeah, I believe you, Paul said dismissively. I'll go see what's up. Chris continued to protest, but Paul wouldn't budge, and soon he was inside the house, making his way towards the basement. Chris shook his head, his eyes wide, nearly bulging out of his skull at this point. Screw this, he yelled, seeming to grow more agitated by the second. I warned you guys. Before we could say anything else, he bolted, sprinting like a bat out of hell towards the woods. We tried chasing after him, but couldn't come close to matching his speed. We stopped, panting for air, as we watched him disappear into the tree line. "What the hell?" Jay asked. "Is he being serious? I thought it was a joke." I shook my head. "Let's go check on Paul." We ran back to the house, entering to see the basement door wide open. The place was completely silent, but before I could call out, I heard someone moving up the stairs. I backed up, unsure of what to expect or how to react, when Paul came out of the darkness, looking somewhat bewildered. He looked at us and shook his head. "That's freaky, man. Was he being real? There's people down there?" Not exactly. The three of us went down there, with my nerves yet to be completely settled. We couldn't find a light switch, but there were enough windows and enough daylight for us to move around. Turns out, Chris hadn't been totally correct, but he probably hadn't been lying either. Planted right in front of the stairs was a table with 3 chairs. Sitting in those 3 chairs were some of the most lifelike sculptures I'd ever seen. 2 soldiers in what appeared to be old military outfits, and a woman in some kind of long religious dress. They weren't quite enough to be uncanny. If you looked at them for more than a few seconds, you could tell that they were carved from stone and then meticulously painted, something you could confirm by touching them. Still, they were exceptionally crafted, something that could have only been achieved by a dedicated professional. "I mean, I don't blame him," Paul said, referring to Chris. "I almost shat bricks when I first saw him. I mean, what the hell?" I remembered back to the conversation I'd had with him, how we'd claimed that one of them had actually looked at him, and then a shiver went down my spine. Che laughed, a palpable relief in his voice. "How much you think these sell for?" "I'm down to take 'em and find out," Paul joked. On the surface, it made enough sense. The homeowners were in possession of some very valuable items that they'd stored in the basement, simply forgetting to lock it this time around. Jay and Paul continued looking at them, taking pictures, marveling at how weird it was. On the other hand, I wasn't so keen on doing so. I wanted to get the hell out of the basement ASAP. The details just weren't adding up. I knew Chris well. If the only thing he'd seen had been these statues, he wouldn't have reacted the way he did. Jay was looking at his phone, smiling at the pictures he'd taken, when suddenly his expression dropped. He put his phone down and looked ahead. There's another one over there, in the corner," he said. "What you mean?" Paul asked, looking closely at one of the soldiers' rifles. "It's another statue, in the corner." Paul looked up and looked towards where Jay was pointing. "Oh, yeah, I see it." The two of them continued to look at it, but showed no indication of wanting to explore it. Instead, they stood still, their expressions slowly being taken over by a look of deep unease. Eventually, I looked as well. It did appear to be a statue, something tucked away in one of the very dark corners. It was tall, extremely tall, maybe 7 feet, its head well eclipsing the top of one of the bookshelves. Its bottom half was completely obscured, but for what the light was revealing, it was wearing some kind of helmet, like one of the steel ones the soldiers were equipped with back in World War I. There came a point, as my eyes were adjusting to the darkness, where a pit began to form in my stomach. Its features were slowly revealing themselves, and it almost looked as if it were twitching. I thought that maybe it was just the darkness playing tricks on me, until I saw it blink. Clear as day, it blinked. I guess the other two saw the same thing, because they were practically trampling each other as they ran up the stairs. We slammed the door shut behind us before quickly pushing one of the couches in front of it. Paul and I were halfway out the front door, but Jay was still in the house. "The hell are you doing?" Paul yelled at him. "Come on." "I want my laptop," Jay said, throwing Paul the keys. "I'll be quick. Start the truck." He ran up the stairs while Paul continued to curse at him. "Really, dude? Are you serious?" Then I remembered my own laptop.
thinking about how annoying it would be if I were to lose it. I looked at the basement door, then at the stairs, and then at Paul. "That'll take 5 seconds, tops," I said. I could hear him cursing behind me as I ran, jumping 3 steps at a time until I reached my room, darting in and grabbing my laptop from the desk. As I rushed out of there, I saw that the door to Jay's room was shut. I stopped, slowed my breathing. I was almost certain that he hadn't gone back downstairs. I would have seen or heard him. I approached the door. "Jay, the hell are you doing?" No response. I looked at the door, but every muscle was frozen, almost as if my body were warning me not to go in. Suddenly it creaked open, just slightly, and I jumped back. "Jay?" I asked. Still no response. I couldn't see anything through the crack until my eyes drifted upward, toward the ceiling. A pair of eyes looked down at me, large eyes set too far apart on a face with skin that was much too pale. I turned and bolted back downstairs as I heard the door swinging open the rest of the way. Of course I didn't look back and ran outside, just jumping into the passenger seat of the truck. "Where is he?" Paul asked. "Just drive," I told him. He didn't protest and stepped on the gas, ripping down the dirt road. We continued driving until we reached a rest stop, the first place with other people. By that point, we both called or messaged the homeowners about a dozen times. Nothing but radio silence on their end. We even noticed that the listing itself had been removed from the Airbnb entirely. Then we called the police. Somebody answered, and I explained the situation as in-depth as I could. The operator listened without interrupting, waited a few seconds, and then asked for the address. I told it to her. Another bout of silence elapsed before she hung up. After arriving back in the city, we considered reporting it again, but neither of us had the nerve to do so. We also hadn't heard from Chris. We've gone to his apartment and knocked on his door, but nobody answers. I tried to do some research on the place, Googling the cabin's address. One result came up, a website that appeared to consist solely of an album of black and white images of soldiers standing in various places, with dates and addresses written beneath them in small text. I Control-F'd it and found the address I was looking for. The accompanying photo was of a tall soldier holding a blood-stained hatchet and standing in a clearing surrounded by trees, with the outline of a cabin behind him. The man's skin was pale, his eyes oddly large, and set so wide apart that it just didn't look right. There were also 2 dates attached to it, August 17th, 1915, and the date that we had first arrived at the cabin. It's been about a week removed from the incident, and Paul and I have made the mutual decision to drop it, to try and go back to our ordinary lives. But it's been difficult. I keep expecting to receive a phone call from the cops, asking me questions about Chris or Jay, where I'd last seen them, at least. Those guys have families. They probably knew where they were heading, and who they'd gone with. Yet nobody has reached out. Doesn't feel like we're out of the clearing here. Doesn't feel like this is over at all.
I don't know about you guys, but I always love a good basement story. I don't know, maybe it's because I've never had one, but the basement just seems like a place where creepy things always seem to happen. Moving right along, let's go to, a constant contributor to the channel, Maleficent Bag 1062, where we hear about a monster in the small pond.
I've always been afraid of the water. Something about its mysterious depths obscuring the unknown has always left me feeling uneasy. In fact, for that reason, I've never learned how to swim. My father tried to teach me once. We were at our local lake, enjoying a beautiful Sunday afternoon, the sun shining brightly as it bathed us in its warmth. I innocently dipped my feet in the water, smiling at the jovial laughter that fluttered in the air. "I think it's high time you learned how to swim," my father told me. I giggled,
happy at the revelation that my father was finally going to show me how to swim. I retreated my foot to the shoreline and followed him to the edge of the dock. He jumped in and remained submerged for several seconds, my eyes fixated on the rippling current where my dad waited to come back up. Time slowed to an excruciating pace as my patience grew with concern. Splash! "Okay, kiddo, your turn. Jump in and I'll catch you," my dad said as he surprised me with a big splash. My smile returned as I saw him, and all the confidence was restored, knowing that nothing bad could happen as long as my dad was around. So I took a deep breath and gripped my nose, careful to aim so that I'd land in my dad's open arms. The most odd feeling inundated my senses as my feet lifted off the ground. Anxiety shot across my mind as my eyes remained on my father's gaze. I saw his smile slowly morph into something most hideous. "Ah!" my dad yelped out. By the time I landed in the water, my dad had disappeared from sight. I kicked and thrashed as I called out for him. I could feel my body getting heavier and heavier as I began to sink. I screamed and pleaded for help, not knowing what was happening to my father, and within seconds I had descended into the abyss of emptiness, the world above continuously fading away as darkness engulfed me. I don't know how long I was in the water for. I woke up with an audience overlooking my small body. A man hovered above asking if I was all right. I wanted to respond, but the only words that came out were, "Where's my dad?" Everyone's eyes slowly dipped down, as if they were doing their best to make eye contact, and that's when I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was 20 feet away, laying unmoving and dormant. He was dead. Apparently, it had been a water snake. I didn't even know those things existed, but the creature bit him, and unfortunately, that's all it took for my father to drown. Ever since that day, I've been terrified of the water, doing my best to avoid it if all possible. Even when I shower, I feel my blood pressure spike. So, I moved out into the middle of nowhere, as far from any lake or coast as I could get, deep into the heartland, surrounded by the vastness of tree lines. I lived in a newly built apartment complex, surrounded by beautiful and vibrant forests. Each morning I would get up and serve myself a cup of coffee and walk over to my balcony as I stood mesmerized by the enchanting woods. It was truly a wonder. The only issue I had was this new construction next to my door. They had already cut down several trees, excavating the land. Apparently they were going to build some gas station, and for now, all I saw was one giant empty hole. I guess that's where they were going to put the gas lines for the pumps. I did my best to ignore the eyesore, only knowing that it was going to get worse. I've even thought of different ways on how I could get the construction to stop, but never really acted out any of these ideas, just knowing more that it was a fantasy than anything. I work from home, and each day I'd hear the drilling and the pounding coming from the site, and I would shut my eyes tightly, doing my best to drown out the sound. So when a heavy storm came to town, I was elated knowing that they would have to halt the construction. The rain was relentless. I hid in my closet like some child as the ponderous raindrops bombarded my window, the thunderous clash of lightning terrifying me. The next day, to my delight, the storm clouds had dissipated, and all that remained were puddles of water, as the sun blessed us with its glow. I smiled, knowing that the construction crew would wait for the site to dry, which could take days. So I walked over to my kitchen, as I had always done, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, practically giggling with the pleasure of my newfound solitude. I couldn't hear a sound, just pure silence, well, other than the birds chirping. I walked over to my balcony to look out over the tree line, and inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of pine, and that was when I looked down at the once massive hole that was no longer empty. Rather, it was now a pond of mud. "Ugh," I whispered. But that's when I saw it. Couldn't believe my eyes. There was something moving in the water. What the hell is that? I asked, in complete befuddlement. Whatever it was, the thing was enormous, practically taking up the entire pond. I couldn't make out the shape, and all I could do was stare in disbelief as the thing thrashed around. Maybe it's a flock of birds, I rationalized to myself. I could feel my skin begin to crawl as beads of sweat formed on my brow, my breathing becoming heavy as I knew I had to step away from the balcony. I ran back to my closet and curled up in the fetal position as I counted backwards from 10, trying to calm myself. After about 30 seconds, I cautiously left the solace of my closet and went back to my desk to work. I tried my best to forget the anomaly that lay in the depths of that pond, but that thrashing sound, sounds of water splashing around ceaselessly, was what filled my day. I did my best to drown out the sounds. My anxiety was at an all-time high, and I did the only thing I could think of. I took a heavy dose of sleeping medication and slept in my closet. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little silly, knowing that I'd overreacted. The mysterious encounter surely had a reasonable explanation, and, of course, I'm no zoologist, so with that reassurance, I took a step towards my balcony, feeling the most brave I ever had. As always, I inhaled deeply and closed my eyes for several seconds, preparing myself to look down at that muddy pond. As my eyes cautiously opened, I saw nothing. The pond was gone, just an empty hole as it had been before. I almost felt like jumping in celebration, but suppressed the urge. Rather, I went to pour myself a fresh cup of coffee, all smiles. As the bitterness engulfed my taste buds, I heard the most dreadful sound I could imagine, and I ran back to the balcony as I heard it again, the sound of thunder. "No!" I exclaimed, not understanding where the hell the storm clouds had come from. To my nightmare, the forecast was grim. Somehow we were going to be consumed by a terrible thunderstorm for the next few days. As the night went on, I tried my best to ignore the storm that had encapsulated my apartment building. I stayed away as far as I could from the windows, and especially from the balcony. Though I wasn't going to hide in the closet like some coward anymore, I could just think of my father any time I felt that tingling sensation of fear try to creep its way into my mind. I honestly did pretty well. I spent most of the night watching movies, completely immersed in the reality of entertainment, and soon I fell asleep. That night, I dreamt of my father, me and him back at that dreadful lake, him calling out to me to jump into his arms, but this time I could clearly see the beast behind him. Well, I could see the thrashing of the current as something ghastly revealed itself. It was as if it was a tentacle, and I couldn't stop looking. "Jump, son! Jump, son! Jump! 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 Jump!" And with that I woke. But to my horror, I could still hear my father calling out to me, "Jump! Jump! Jump!" The voice was coming from outside, and I could feel all the blood leave my body as I froze in utter terror. The rain continued to pour down, but even with all the thunder, I could still hear the voice. "Dad?" I whispered. I had to be going crazy. Perhaps this was some fever-induced nightmare, and I cowered underneath my covers like some frightened child, hiding from the monster that was in my closet. I even covered my ears, but some of that voice, it still came through, like it was broadcasted into my mind. Finally, a bit of courage erupted inside of me. Maybe it was just frustration, but I decided to confront the voice, so I walked towards the balcony. I slid open the glass door and stepped out into the waterfall of rain and stared down into that chasm of water. Before I could even look, I heard the thrashing of that horror there, as if the creature had come right out of my dreams. I couldn't see the entire beast, but I could see the tentacles. "What do you want?" I shouted. "Jump, jump, jump, jump." That's all I heard as I looked around in utter disbelief. No one else was here. No one else was seeing this. I thrust myself back into the apartment, sheltering away from that demon as I collapsed to the floor. My heart had virtually escaped my chest as I did everything in my power to calm down. I looked towards the closet and was tempted to hide like I always did, but I was too weak to move, so I crawled. As I squirmed across the hardwood floor, the voice only became more thunderous, breaking through the deluge of the storm, and before I could make it to the closet, I had passed out. I woke up the next morning, my clothes completely drenched, but not in rainwater. Rather, it was my own sweat, and my head was throbbing like I was hung over. I got up from the floor and looked around with absolute bewilderment. That's when I remembered the creature. I couldn't hear the voice anymore, and I sighed in relief. I also noticed it had stopped raining, though the dark clouds still hovered above with malice, leaving me in utter angst. I contemplated the idea of just leaving, but I knew I had to conquer my fear. There was no monster in the water. That would be impossible. Even so, I was filled with trepidation. But I stuck my chin in the air and decided that I had to stay. No hiding in the closet, no breathing heavy. Instead, I was going to confront this nightmare. As night approached, extinguishing any of the sun that might have been apparent, I poured myself a glass of wine while I sat in the dark and waited for the voices to come. It was raining again, the thunder back, and I took a sip each time the thunder burst around me. I waited and drank, sitting there hoping to hear it. I would occasionally get up and walk over to the balcony, thinking I would see those horrid tentacles. But there was nothing. Eventually, I fell asleep in my favorite chair, alcohol simmering on my breath as an empty wine bottle lay tilted over next to me. That's when I heard it. A monstrous roar engulfed my apartment, practically shaking the walls. I jumped out of my chair, mesmerized by the sound. I looked around, confused, and then ran towards the balcony. And there it was, the tentacles thrashing again. I needed to know what this thing was. Why did it sound like my dad? I charged down the stairs, sprinting towards the beast. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. I just knew I needed to see what this thing wanted with me. I stood next to the small pond, those tentacles still sputtering around. The thing was massive up close, and I looked into the water, trying to see what it was, and that's when I saw the eye. It was beneath the slithering tentacles, and it was staring right at me. I froze with disbelief. I couldn't look away, almost as if this creature had possessed my body. Jump, 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 jump. My father's voice called out to me again. Maybe he was down there too. Maybe somehow he'd survived, and I needed to know. So I jumped in. I couldn't see anything, just darkness and disquietude surrounded me. I couldn't even see the tentacles anymore. I just began to sink. I carelessly drifted further down into the abyss, not able to hear my father anymore, and I could slowly feel my mind beginning to drift into obscurity. I think I was dying, and that's when an arm from above grabbed me and pulled me back up. I was barely lucid. I couldn't see who saved me as I lay on the muddy shoreline of the pond, practically unconscious. That's when I heard the mysterious person tell me, "I'll catch you." And then I passed out. I awoke to the sound of construction machinery firing all around me, while the sun shone down on my face. I looked around and saw that the pond was gone, dried up, only leaving an empty hole, just as it had before. As I stood to my feet, trying to have resolve over my senses, I smiled and understand who had saved me. I don't know what the monster was, or whether it was real or not, or whether any of that actually happened, but I'm no longer scared of the water. Even if that beast did try to come back, I know now that my father will always be there to save me.
One more story for you, and this last one is a pretty good one. We're going back to the woods, to a cabin, where there's a strange slamming at the cabin door, sent to us by
Sudden cry of crows. I hope you enjoy hearing about this odd cabin with a slamming door.
I remember looking over at Megan and thinking, it's hard to imagine the abyss is just on the other side of her. We had escaped the humid bayous and casual murders of Houston and hightailed it to Colorado. It had become something of an annual tradition, a weed pilgrimage to Mecca in the mountains. Our yearly foray into real wintry cold had always revived the life within us. Even the gorgeous red of her Irish hair seemed to glint brighter in the deafening quiet of the white world. I didn't deserve her. No false humility here. She was truly better than I was, on a cellular level. Megan had been through unimaginable horrors, hellish trials that left traumatic scars she only showed to those lucky enough to bask in her glow. And yet, somehow, it's like she was able to just rebound the cruelty of the world right off of her, sending her own kindness reverberating along with it. The angrier you got, the calmer she grew. Gnash her teeth in a temper tantrum, and she'd find a deeper level of kindness. It wasn't that plastic falsity so many people possess with their feeble masks. It always rang true. Not me. I absorbed every blow the world dealt me. It warped and twisted and blackened me. I was the very definition of rot. But dying flowers still seek out sunshine. And that was Megan. I'm not a good man. Bungling the time had been a far worse mistake than I anticipated. I was winding my crappy Chevy in a constant circle, forever rising on the mountain in the pitch black as the snow cloaked the poor excuse for a road. I just had to push the envelope and have us stay at the top of the damn mountain. I was half stoned and completely terrified, but the feel of Megan's hand on my thigh gave me a boost of confidence. I always kept fighting through the fear, exhaustion, and endless losses for her. One harrowing journey later, I finally exhaled as we crested into the glacial valley atop the mountain. A few dozen missed turns through the endless world later, we'd arrived. The cabin was as picturesque in reality as it had been on the website. It all seemed too good to be true looking back. I should have realized if it smelled like rotting, there's probably a corpse in there somewhere. I was an ardent bargain hunter, but this deal was mind-blowing. I should have been suspicious. The prize, the quality, the nearly barren website with the obscure URL. But I remembered something about gift horses and teeth. What they don't tell you is to watch for the horse flipping the script and kicking you in the teeth. The idyllic scene laid out before us would have sent Robert Frost to his pen, and I had sneakily stocked up on a surprise for Megan at our last grocery stop. I was going to surprise her with my famous potato salad. I love to cook for her, but really any surprise would do, like springing this trip on her. I always had a surprise for her, for better or worse. Megan squealed at the prospect. After noshing on the gluttonous snack for half an hour, we shared a blunt and put on some ancient country as we danced slowly, alone in the world. Or so we believed. The first crash against the cabin door made me regret being the only Texan to never carry a gun. It was like thunder had hopped on the back of a linebacker and rocketed into the door. The hinges squealed, the small cabin shook, as if rightfully afraid. I was at the window while Megan ducked behind the bed. I saw the covered porch clearing for parking, maybe 20 yards along, and the tree line. The dark and the cold corner swallows the world whole and spits it back out without any real light. I felt truly blind. Still, there was no movement. I turned to Megan just as our eyes caught in mutual confusion. A second smash rocketed against the door, sending small splinters flying. Megan screamed, and that was enough for me. I charged out the door blindly, a moron in love. I screamed some jumble of obscenities, threats, nonsense, an amalgam of fear and anger, emotional stepsisters with an unhealthy attachment. I let myself feel my heavy breath slow, each exhale sending white waves dancing through the air. My right hand slowly unclenched, and the blood drained from my knuckles. Then I saw it. Out of the woods, slowly trotting, was what I thought was a massive wild dog. Terror and logic are not great bunkmates. As it approached, I realized it was a male fox. I had caught a few nighttime drunken glimpses of tiny red foxes in West Texas when I was in college, but they were no bigger than an overfed house cat. This creature towered like a sinister cat and golden dog had been smashed together by some inebriate pagan god of old. Its trot was lackadaisical, as if it were merely out window shopping, but he kept his eyes fixed on me, stopping 5 yards short of my frozen figure. The fox was the size of a Rottweiler, and dropped on its hind legs and cocked its head quizzically. It began a low, short whine and wore a visage that seemed to say, "I don't want to rip you apart, but it wouldn't be that hard." I slowly backed up. When I saw the fox didn't move, and I was close enough, I made a run for it. Luckily, Megan and I were simpatico enough for her to throw the door open, and I slammed in just in time. We both sank to the floor with our backs against the door. What the words hadn't even escaped my lips before we were both sent flying by a crash against the portal. Diving behind the bed, we watched as the door cartoonishly stretched with each attack, never giving way, like an unbreakable barrier holding back the night. Between each crash, the fox whines grew louder. "I'm going to try something," I whispered to Megan. "Pappy, no, no," Megan begged, trying futilely to grab my hand and hold me in place. Somewhere inside, I think she knew I was forever destined to plunge ahead stupidly. Snatching the pot full of the remaining potato salad, I tore the door open and flung the food out. "Here, eat, you little interloper." I thought maybe I'd set it back on its heels, but the fox wandered into view, cocked its head further, and sent chills down my spine. It examined the pot and began voraciously eating. It stopped eating abruptly and bounded off in a blur into the forest, out of sight. We decided to risk the bears and the other denizens of the night, and left the potato salad outside and hunkered down. The slamming stopped. Everything was quiet once more. Megan and I cuddled in bed, her downing some shrooms and blazing through a blunt to calm her nerves, me downing a few beers, both of us debating whether a fox could have done all that. And why didn't the door give? Cuddled under so many warm blankets, we both passed out. I was on my feet at the first crash, though. Peering from the window, I saw the massive fox trotting from the tree line. My jaw nearly dropped as I called a silently sobbing Megan over. I offered some comfort, but something inside me said she had to see what I was seeing, like I was privy to something supernatural, secluded to this fixed point of space and time. I wanted to share it with someone I loved. Megan gasped when she joined me at the window. "He brought his girlfriend. Your potato salad really is that good." There were a few giggles among the tears and sobs. Seeming to almost levitate as she swayed, a vixen half his size followed in tow towards the pot. She shimmered silver light with each lithe sachet. I don't have the words to describe how lovely she was. It hurt to look at her, but I couldn't look away. She was elegant and dainty, but exuded something powerful and ethereal. She didn't need quizzical looks and sighs to make me afraid. We stood safely behind the window, hand in hand, watching the lovers feast on my potato salad. When they were sated, they slowly wandered back to the woods. The male turned back, I swear, with a rueful and pitying look on his face. The vixen never did. The door immediately began smashing without cessation, sending a shrieking Megan diving. 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 times louder, with more force and violence than ever before. In my panic, I just stood paralyzed, feeling the blood drain from my face as I tried to understand the horror before me. A beast was flailing and roaring in circles a few feet from the door, 10 feet tall, the head and antlers of a deer adorned with what looked like the skeleton of a bear. Flesh and fur and sinew hung randomly from rib cage, arm, and leg. Long, bony, hooked claws dragged and sparked against the hard earth. The abomination wailed up at the moon. It looked at me with enormous empty black eyes and slammed against the door impossibly fast. Megan was praying, Mary and Joseph and all that gang, and I just rocked back and forth on the floor of what was supposed to be a little slice of paradise. Suddenly, there was silence. I just caught the curved spine of the freakish nightmare slipping into the trees, and I went and comforted a hysterical Megan. Our phones refused to find service, no matter how hard we begged, and being children of the city, we had come ill-prepared. I have no intention of painting myself any calmer. My insides were liquid, and my heart was somewhere in my shoes. I was simply too afraid to make noise. The left leg of my pants felt warm and wet. Embarrassment had begun to set in when the slamming started again. This time it wasn't as hard, but more like a rapid machine gun fire, hitting different spots on the door. Something humanish stood at the tree line. It looked like the naked body of a man, but there was only a bloody, brutal mess where the genitals should be. Stark, naked, wearing the skull of some massive creature, the man was lifting a gnarled stick and screaming nonsense, each word punctuated by a slam against the door. It was only then in the deep dark that I realized what was hitting the door. The porch was littered with the obliterated corpses of starlings, swallows, hawks, 24 other birds I couldn't identify. Each swoosh of the staff, every pagan utterance, sent a kamikaze bird to its doom in rapid succession. Finally, the frenetic casting stopped. Ripping off the skull mask, I could see a bearded man beneath it, his nose and eyes missing, and blood and pus dripping and flowing indiscriminately. Like a petulant child, he leaned forward, put his hands behind him, and screamed, "Hungry!" over and over and over, before swiftly stalking into the woods. I spent the next 30 minutes convincing Megan this was all real, and not the manifestation of a shroom trip gone terribly awry. Honestly, I could hardly convince myself. My attempts were disputed by a slam against the door, a pause for a few seconds, and a similar but smaller one, like someone bouncing two different-sized basketballs against the portal. The adrenaline was beginning to burn into me and steal away my energy. I felt like passing out and began only thinking of my own fears. I dragged myself to the window as Megan buried herself under the covers and tried to force the world away. Out of the woods wandered a bear that had to be at least 8 feet tall. Next to him was a woodsman, decked out as though he had started his shift felling lumber 100 years ago. The bear laid in front of the man with a rusted saw. The lumberjack began sawing the bear's head off, meeting no resistance or protestation. When his wicked work was done, he tucked the bear's head under his arm and knelt down. My knees began snapping together like old bones dancing in a 90s kids' Halloween CD as the headless corpse of the bear rose and used its claws to cut through the back of the lumberjack's neck, severing and separating his head. The headless corpses rose in sick unison, sauntering over to the door, and took turns throwing each other's respectable heads against the door. Bang, pause, smaller bang, over and over and over. I rocked and smelled urine and tried not to beg for my mother as I listened to the heads rebounding time and time again against the door. It was only when the equally eerie silence came that I realized Megan was unconscious. I snapped back to reality and prayed to anyone who would listen that she hadn't killed herself. I mostly didn't want to be alone. An Ambien bottle was next to her. I wasn't sure how much she had brought, but it didn't seem like many were missing. She breathed comfortably and snored. I wasn't sure of anything, but I crossed my fingers that she had just taken enough to knock herself out from this hellscape. I didn't wait for the smashing to return. I walked into the frigid air, feeling the piss in my jeans freeze, and called to the tree line. "Who are you? What do you want?" Without warning, at least 50 people, all wearing black robes, various animal skulls for masks, appeared at the edge of the clearing. Some were adorned with antlers. Some were painted in what looked like blood. Some were covered in what looked like mud or shit or both. So many had their robes open, flowing in the wind, revealing mutilated bodies, missing and bloodied genitalia, strange symbols of animals in the forest carved on the foreheads and legs. None moved. Among them I caught glimpses of the hulking skeletal creature, the man with the staff, the headless lumberjack, the bear. The only movement and sound was the mournful howl of the wind. Then they came. I was nearly to Amarillo before he spoke. "Wife." "What?" I asked, ensuring I kept a respectful tone. "Not my girlfriend. My wife." "Oh, sorry," I muttered, with as much sincerity as I could muster. My mind was elsewhere. All I could think about was them trotting out of the trees and seeing every sick knee bend and twisted head bow. I remembered seeing him change in the conversation, finding out what they wanted, learning it had to be given. Certain lines, physical, otherwise, in this world cannot be crossed by those who don't belong in it. I remember striking a deal. Fear got the best of me. I'm not a good man. I remember feeling the bile in my stomach rise as I dragged Megan's half-conscious body out of bed, watching her come out of a haze and realize the dark truth, hearing her beg me, profess her love. I remember dragging her out into the clearing and throwing her to them to save myself. I remember watching her body fall and hearing her screams grow quieter as he dragged her deep into the woods, with the whole lot of freaks following behind. What I remember most was the vixen and I being alone, watching a smile grow across her maw, watching her bare teeth and lick them before bounding off into the forest, off to find her acolytes. I got in the car and waited for my dark passenger. Thanks for your help, Pappy. We needed to set up elsewhere, to expand and grow our special little family, and you've been a peach. We'll have to fetch, as I said, my wife, after she feasts, of course. She needs a new body to inhabit before she travels, one given willingly by a lover. I got mine. Time for my queens. The fox, who was no longer a fox, sighed with contentment. Oh, by the way, she truly did love your potato salad. Top notch. But I suspect she will prefer your Megan.
And just like that, our stories are at an end once again. I'm sure I'll see you around the fire again tomorrow for more cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.